because there's no one in my time has shown such great passion and love of the game than Bobby. And he used to phone me before every big game to wish me all the best, and he did that for many years. And even in Barcelona in '99, the afternoon of the game, he phoned me.
When football talks about intimidation, the image that usually comes to mind is brute force, crunching tackles, and defenders who rule their territory through fear. Bobby Moore was the complete opposite of that stereotype, and yet some of the greatest minds in football history believed he was one of the most dominant and unsettling defenders the game has ever seen. His power did not come from aggression or physical threat, but from intelligence, calm authority, and an almost eerie ability to make elite attackers feel as though they were already beaten before they touched the ball. To face Bobby Moore was to face someone who appeared to be thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead, someone who made the game feel smaller and more restrictive no matter how big the occasion. For Sir Alf Ramsey, Bobby Moore was not just a defender, but the embodiment of everything he wanted England to be. Appointing Moore as captain at just 22 years old was not a gamble in Ramsey's mind, but a logical decision based on trust. Ramsey saw in Moore a player who understood football not as chaos, but as a sequence of controllable moments. That understanding gave Moore a presence that spread calm through his teammates and quiet doubt through opponents, even in the most hostile environments. Before we go further into what made Bobby Moore so unique, take a quick moment to support the channel. If you enjoy deep football stories that explore intelligence, leadership, and the minds behind the legends, make sure to like the video and subscribe. It helps these stories reach more people who truly appreciate the history of the game. Ramsey often described Moore as cool and calculating, and those words were not chosen lightly. Moore never looked rushed, never appeared panicked, and never seemed overwhelmed by pressure. Even when attackers were charging toward him at full speed, he remained upright, balanced, and patient. Rather than reacting emotionally, he waited, observed, and then intervened at precisely the right moment. That patience was deeply unsettling for forwards who relied on defenders overcommitting or losing discipline in Ramsey's system. Moore functioned almost like an on-field extension of the manager himself. He read the game the way Ramsey wanted. It played, anticipated danger before it fully developed, and positioned others around him with quiet authority. Teammates trusted him instinctively. When Moore spoke, people listened. When he moved, the defensive line followed. That level of control created a psychological edge long before the ball reached England's penalty area. The 1966 World Cup was the clearest expression of this influence. Ramsey later said that winning the tournament would have been impossible without Moore, not because of spectacular tackles or last-ditch heroics, but because of the security he provided. Knowing Moore was behind them allowed England's midfield and attack to play with confidence. For opponents, it was the opposite. The closer they came to Moore, the more options seemed to disappear. One of the most revealing moments of Moore's psychological authority came not on the pitch, but just before the 1970 World Cup. His arrest over a disputed bracelet incident in Colombia could have shattered a lesser player. Instead, Moore handled the situation with remarkable composure, insisting on his innocence and returning to the squad without visible emotional damage. Ramsey later believed that Moore's calm response reinforced his almost imperial aura within the team. If their captain could face that level of stress without cracking, why should anyone else panic? Sir Alex Ferguson, a man famous for valuing toughness and resilience in defenders, made a rare exception when discussing Bobby Moore. Ferguson openly stated that Moore was the best defender he had ever seen, a remarkable claim from someone who coached and watched generations of elite centers. What impressed Ferguson most was not strength or aggression, but Moore's refusal to be dirty or reckless. He defended cleanly, honestly, and intelligently, and yet was almost impossible to beat. Ferguson admired Moore's ability to read attackers. Rather than chase them, where others sprinted and slid, Moore drifted and guided. He allowed opponents to think they had space, only to close it at the exact moment it mattered. Ferguson described this as leading attackers into traps, a form of domination far more sophisticated than intimidation through fear. It was chess rather than warfare, and Moore played it at the highest level. This intelligence-based dominance made Moore especially frustrating for world-class forwards. Players like Pelé, who famously called Moore the fairest defender he ever faced, recognized that Moore never relied on fouls or physical intimidation. Instead, he removed options. Passing lanes disappeared, shooting angles closed. Time seemed to vanish. That kind of defending attacks a forward's confidence. Because there is no clear mistake to exploit, Moore's positioning was perhaps his greatest weapon. He rarely needed to sprint because he was already where the ball was going. His anticipation made him appear almost effortless, and that effortlessness was deeply demoralizing for attackers who were working tirelessly to create chances. When a defender looks calm while nullifying you, it forces uncomfortable questions into your mind. Another crucial aspect of Moore's intimidation was his consistency. He did not have off days where he lost focus or discipline. Match after match, Tournament after tournament, he delivered the same level of control. That reliability created a reputation that preceded him. Opponents knew what they were facing, and that knowledge alone altered how they played. Leadership also played a role. Moore did not shout excessively or dominate conversations, but his authority was unquestioned. He led by example, by preparation, and by clarity of thought. His body language told teammates everything was under control, even when the game was hanging by a thread. That calm leadership drained belief from opponents who sensed that emotional momentum would not be enough to break England down. In an era filled with defenders who built reputations on fear, Moore stood apart as someone who made intelligence intimidating. He proved that dominance does not require violence, and that control can be more powerful than chaos. His style redefined what it meant to be a great defender, influencing generations who followed. When Sir Alf Ramsey trusted Moore with his life, and Sir Alex Ferguson crowned him the best defender he ever saw, they were recognizing the same truth from different perspectives. Bobby Moore intimidated not with force, but with certainty. He made the game predictable for himself and unpredictable for everyone else. And in football, there are few things more frightening than an opponent who already knows how the story ends. As time has passed, Bobby Moore's style has only grown in stature, especially as modern football has come to value intelligence and positioning more than ever before. Analysts now talk endlessly about reading the game, controlling space, and managing moments, concepts that Moore mastered decades earlier. Watching old footage of him today feels surprisingly contemporary, as if his understanding of football was ahead of the era he played in. One of the most remarkable things about Moore was how rarely he appeared flustered, even when facing the most explosive attackers in world football. While others reacted to pace with panic, Moore reacted with balance. He trusted angles, timing, and anticipation, knowing that a defender who stays composed often has the advantage over an attacker relying on instinct alone. This composure had a ripple effect across entire teams. When a backline senses panic in its leader, disorder follows. With Moore, the opposite occurred. His calm slowed the game down for England, even when opponents tried to speed it up. That control of tempo from a defensive position is incredibly rare, and it is one of the reasons his presence felt so commanding. Opponents frequently spoke about the strange frustration of playing against Moore. He didn't provoke him, sieve people down, and didn't engage in mind games through words. Instead, he quietly dismantled attacks. For forwards used to physical battles, this was disorienting. There was nothing to fight against, only decisions that seemed to close off before they could be acted upon. Moore's ability to recover possession cleanly also reinforced his aura. Tackles were timed perfectly, interceptions looked effortless, and clearances were measured rather than panicked. Every action suggested control rather than survival. That distinction mattered because it told opponents that England were not hanging on, but operating on their own terms. Even referees appeared to trust Moore instinctively. His reputation for fairness meant that challenges were rarely questioned, and his leadership was respected. This subtle authority added another layer to his dominance. When officials believe in your judgment, your influence over the game quietly increases, further unsettling those trying to test boundaries as captain. Moore's relationship with referees was calm and respectful, reinforcing the sense that he was an extension of order on the pitch. He didn't beg for decisions or surround officials. He communicated clearly, firmly, and without drama. That professionalism reinforced the psychological advantage England carried in high-pressure matches. What truly elevates Moore's legacy is how his intimidation never crossed into cruelty. He never sought to humiliate opponents or assert superiority through aggression. His dominance was impersonal, almost clinical. He beat attackers by understanding them better than they understood themselves, and then moved on to the next phase of play without celebration or displacer. Alex Ferguson often spoke about players who imposed themselves on games, and Moore did so without ever appearing dominant in the traditional sense. That contradiction is what makes him fascinating. He controlled matches from the back, dictated outcomes, and influenced teammates, all while remaining understated and composed. In the end, Bobby Moore's intimidation was not about fear, but inevitability. Opponents sensed that their best efforts would be absorbed, redirected, and neutralized. Managers trusted him with championships, legends respected him as the ultimate benchmark, and history remembers him as proof that the most powerful form of dominance in football is intelligence, calmly and relentlessly applied. That sense of inevitability followed Moore into every major tournament he played. Opponents might begin matches with confidence, even optimism, but as minutes passed and chances quietly vanished, belief slowly drained away. Attacks that looked promising on paper dissolved into harmless possession, and forwards began taking lower percentage shots simply to feel involved. Moore didn't shout or celebrate these small victories, but their cumulative effect was devastating. What made this even more impressive was Moore's adaptability. He adjusted seamlessly to different systems, partners, and opponents long before Tactical flexibility became a buzzword. Whether England pushed high or sat deeper, Moore recalibrated his positioning instantly. He understood that defending was not a fixed role, but a series of decisions that changed with every movement of the ball. Teammates often describe how Moore made defending feel simpler. Fullbacks trusted him to cover space, midfielders trusted him to hold the line, and goalkeepers trusted him to manage danger before it became urgent. That trust freed others to play with confidence, knowing there was a steady presence behind them who would correct mistakes rather than expose them. As football has evolved into a sport dominated by data, Moore's excellence has found new validation. Metrics that measure interceptions, duels avoided, and positional efficiency align perfectly with what the eye always knew. He prevented danger before it appeared, and modern analysis only confirms how often he chose the optimal solution under pressure. Today, when young defenders study the game, they are often told to watch highlights of attacking flair. But those who truly want to understand defending are still directed toward Bobby Moore. His legacy endures not because of flashy moments, but because he represents the highest form of control, leadership, and intelligence football has ever seen at the back.